Hey everybody, it's Ricardo Gorski, the founder of Tax.One, where we help individuals and businesses pay as little tax as legally possible. And today we are talking about a very, very interesting topic, something that I wanted to discuss for a long time actually, and that is Dubai versus Cyprus. And before I start with the video, I wanted to mention a very important note, and that is that this video is not to judge. I'm going to be completely objective and transparent, mentioning the pros and cons of both jurisdictions as an entrepreneur that actually resides in both countries or cities. And also, I know that Dubai is not the country. However, Dubai is the jurisdiction in the UAE that most entrepreneurs are interested in, and that is why I'm going to talk about mainly Dubai. We are also discussing free zones later on, but let's start with the lifestyle. And I'm living in Cyprus for 6 years. Cyprus is a Mediterranean island with a laid-back and slow pace of life. Lifestyle in Cyprus is very, very chill. It has definitely a traditional charm. It is very family-oriented. We have a lot of retirees here, a lot of families with kids here, and the culture in Cyprus is Greek-oriented. That also means we are Christian Orthodox with a lot of religious people. The locals in Cyprus are very religious. They regularly visit the churches. And also, it is one of the safest EU country, in my opinion, actually maybe even the safest, because in 6 years of living here on this island, I literally never heard about any serious crime. The locals are leaving their doors open at night. You can just leave your car running, go into a cafe, talk with the barista, get your coffee, go out, and your car is still there. No one will steal it. And also there is absolutely zero knife crime here in Cyprus, which we know from other countries like Germany, where I'm from. There are definitely areas that you don't want to visit. We have London with highest crime rates in the history. So this is definitely not what you will see here in Cyprus. And then when we look at Dubai, we have a metropolitan city. It is dynamic, it is adventurous. You see me here at the Dubai Marina having a dinner with skyscrapers, lights, yachts, supercars, everything that you can imagine. It feels a little bit like in a movie when you are in Dubai. And that also leads to the fact that there are literally endless activities. No matter what you desire, what you want to do, what you want to have, what you want to buy, you will definitely find it in the UAE and in Dubai. And that leads to the next point. Dubai definitely offers a luxurious lifestyle. You can get anything you want, any brand, any product at any time during the day. As Dubai is in the UAE, it is an Arab culture over there. We have a lot of Emiratis walking around there in specific areas. So if you speak Arab, then this is definitely a pro point for you. And then Dubai is one of the safest cities in the world. When I was in Dubai just a few months ago, and I'm going very soon again, I just booked my flights for the winter. You will see that people leave their expensive watches just around, and I saw that in the gym when I was in the locker room. I saw a Patek Philippe there, I saw a Rolex there, and I was like, okay, not sure if you can do that in Cyprus, but my main point is to compare these two pictures here, and you just see that it is like yin and yang. You have a beach bar here in Paphos, Cyprus, with a wrecked ship in the background, actual sand, palm trees, which we have in Dubai as well, but we have much more nature in Cyprus. We have the Troodos Mountains. It is just much more green than artificial Dubai. And it just depends on you. That is my point. I'm just laying out the facts in front of you, and at the end of the day, it is you who decide. And why am I talking about this? Because there are multiple different factors that come into play and should play an important role when you decide for your new country. And that is why I want to just discuss a little bit about these softer topics, and then we will go into business and taxes, of course. Another point that is definitely important for you to decide whether Cyprus or Dubai is more for you is the climate. And Cyprus is definitely hot. Like July and August are the hottest months in the year. It is a hot, dry summer, and Dubai just has an extreme heat. So whereas in Cyprus you can still go out after the sun has set, in Dubai you spend most of your time indoors, especially during summer. And you can look at this chart right here that beautifully shows how much Dubai is hotter. So we see here the blue line that I just drew over. You see we are a good 10 degrees Celsius more hot in the UAE than in Cyprus. And the same goes for the minimum temperatures. So winter is also about 10 degrees hotter in the UAE than in Cyprus at any given time. And then just a super short topic, because I'm not going to political opinions here. I just want to mention that because it will be relevant later on when we talk about taxes. And what you need to know, as simple as Cyprus is a EU member country. Cyprus is a democracy and a presidential republic, as much as you can say that in the EU, which leads to the fact that every citizen in the country has a right to vote, which will then lead to freedom. However, as we are many times restricted by EU regulation, it just takes a much longer time to pass certain legislations and new rules and laws through as it is in the UAE, because the UAE is a federal absolute monarchy. What does that mean? The power of the UAE is concentrated in ruling families, the royal family. And even though that sounds a bit unknown, especially for Western individuals coming from a democracy, the UAE beautifully proved that it works within the last few decades, because we need to keep in mind, just a few years ago, Dubai was a literal desert. There was nothing there. And they became this hotspot for entrepreneurs, wealthy individuals, investors, and they built this amazing infrastructure, which is now one of the top cities in the world. So that definitely shows that with an absolute monarchy, you can just make decisions much faster, reach your goals much faster, and this obviously brings a lot of benefits as well. But that's about it. I just wanted to mention that for later on. And now we're getting to the interesting part, and that is business in Cyprus and in Dubai. First of all, Cyprus, as you already know, it is a small island with EU legal framework because we are within the European Union. To me, Cyprus is still very unknown. Most people don't even know it. Even other islands like Malta in the EU is much more famous, much more popular. A lot of holding structures are in Malta, even though in my opinion, the Cyprus holding structure comes with many benefits that we will discuss as well. The main industries in Cyprus are Forex, tech, and real estate. Tech and IP has also tax advantages that I'm going to discuss. But funny enough, Cyprus even has agriculture. We are exporting wine, we are exporting halloumi and many other agricultural products, which is definitely cool. When you just drive a few minutes into the mountains, you see farmers, you see villages, and this is something that you don't really see in Dubai. We have a lot of solopreneurs and entrepreneurs communities here. I host a monthly entrepreneurs meetup in cities like Paphos, Limassol. We will rent a catamaran next month and we'll host about 80 entrepreneurs there to just create a little bit of a hype, create a community of like-minded people. But I think that Cyprus is an international hotspot in the making. Within the last few years, since I came to Cyprus the first time in 2019, I've seen a huge run-up in entrepreneurs coming here, especially from the German community, which is also related to social media. There are a lot of big influencers, German influencers, that just talk about their life here in Cyprus, and that is why a lot of German entrepreneurs are relocating here. Then Dubai. Dubai is a top destination for wealthy expats. I mean, you just have to Google top destinations for expats and nomads. You will see that Dubai is always in the top 10, 15 next to Bali, Bangkok, all these Southeast Asian hotspots, European hotspots, Western hotspots, even America, and Dubai is definitely on the forefront there, and you will rarely see Cyprus. I saw that in 2025, Dubai will attract about 10,000 millionaires, whereas Cyprus is somewhere in the hundreds. But yeah, Dubai just has this massive international infrastructure already. When you are there, you will know what I'm talking about, and there are just opportunities everywhere. But this also leads to the very interesting point that it is highly competitive there. You will have a hard time become the best cafe in Dubai, whereas in Cyprus, within 3 years, you could have the biggest franchise here in Cyprus if you know what you're doing. And that leads to the conclusion that Cyprus is relaxed and down to earth, whereas Dubai is like survival in the fittest. And again, I'm not talking negatively about Dubai. I literally live there too for like 3 months per year. Now, taxes. And we start with the personal tax because this is the most interesting for natural persons, and then we will go into legal entities. Let's talk about Cyprus first. So Cyprus has a personal income tax that is progressive. It starts at 20%, goes up to 35% if your annual income exceeds 60,000 euros. But you have a tax-free allowance of up to 19,500 euros, which is very interesting if you want to do some tricks to be below the personal income tax, because income tax is actually irrelevant, which I will discuss in a minute. But there's also a 50% income tax deduction, which attracts a lot of talent to Cyprus. Especially tech and IT companies are taking advantage of that, because they are just bringing their employees here to Cyprus and they basically pay 17.5% in income tax instead of 35%. And there's also the 90 days rule, which means you can be completely tax-free for 3 months if you spend those 3 months outside the country. This is relevant for someone, for example, that works for a big company from here in Cyprus, tax residency in Cyprus, but visits the headquarters outside of Cyprus 3 months per year. And then within those 3 months outside, all your income is not taxed here in Cyprus, which is also interesting for some loopholes, for some tricks that you can do with your accountant. But as I said, income is actually irrelevant here in Cyprus for most entrepreneurs with their own company. What do I mean by that? First of all, there is a 0% tax on capital gains and a 0% tax on trading securities. So stock trading is tax-free here in Cyprus. We also don't have a gift tax. There is no wealth tax, no property tax, no church tax, which we know from Germany. And there is also no exit tax here in Cyprus, which is definitely beneficial as well. Then we have the so-called non-dom status, and this is why the income tax is irrelevant, because once you apply for the non-dom status, you will get a stamped non-dom certificate from the Cyprus tax authorities that will exempt you from the SDC. The SDC is the special defense contribution, which actually every domiciled individual in Cyprus has to pay. At the moment, it is 17% on your dividend and interest income. However, if you are a foreigner that relocates to Cyprus, like me, I came from Germany, I relocated to Cyprus, I don't pay any tax on dividend, I don't pay any tax on interest income for the next 17 years. The only thing you have to pay is the 2.65% NHS contribution, which goes to the National Health Service, which is basically the healthcare here in Cyprus. And very interesting about that is that this contribution is actually capped at a dividend and interest income of 180,000 euros. Meaning, if your dividend and or interest income exceeds that amount, so you are basically receiving a dividend of 1 million, let's say, you still only have to pay 2.65% on the 180,000 euros per tax calendar year on your worldwide dividend and interest income. That means if we are playing this game further and we say you have a dividend income of 10 million, for example, because you have a big company or whatever, or you have a lot of shares in a publicly listed company that pays out dividends, then your NHS contribution is linearly going down, because the 2.65% will go lower and lower and can go even as low as 0%. And that is why I say dividend tax is 0% in Cyprus. And then also very interesting actually is the tax residency rule. We have the 183 days tax residency rule, which basically is international tax standard, meaning if you spend more than 6 months in any country in the world, you are their legal tax resident and you pay taxes in that country. And then we have the 60 days tax residency rule, which means you can become a legal tax resident in the country of Cyprus by just spending 2 months per tax calendar year here in Cyprus. That comes with a few other requirements, such as you need to have a permanent address, so you basically need to rent a property and you need to show that you have some kind of intention that Cyprus is your home. You also need to fulfill a few other requirements that we are more than happy to discuss in an individual consultation call, but just the fact that this is available is definitely interesting. And then we have the personal tax in the UAE, which is much shorter. There is no tax on personal income in the UAE, which is definitely interesting. There is no tax on dividends. There is no tax on interest and capital gains income by default. You don't need to have any specific status or whatever. If you become a tax resident in the UAE, you pay 0% on income, dividends, interest, capital gains, and a few others, but those are the main income sources for most entrepreneurs, investors, and individuals. And the UAE also has a 90 days tax residency where you can spend 90 days in the country, but just as in Cyprus, you also need to fulfill a few requirements for the 3 months tax residency that we are also happy to discuss in an individual consultation call. So that's it for the personal taxation. It heavily depends on your current setup, structure, companies, investments, whatever you own, whatever your income is, where your assets are, what makes more sense to you. But within the next few minutes, you will definitely understand it more and more. Now, I want to discuss the immigration, residency and citizenship, because in order to become a tax resident of a country, whether it is Cyprus or Dubai, you first have to have the permanent residency so that you can spend more than 90 days in the country and work from that country. So in Cyprus, for EU citizens, we have the so-called yellow slip, which is technically, that's what the law states, a temporary residency, but it is an eternal temporary residency, which means it renews itself every single year for European citizenship. So technically it is still a PR, but they call it a TR. Why is that? Because the PR is a different scheme that I will also go into in a minute. First, non-EU citizens can either apply for the TR, which is basically the visitor visa, which lasts for 1 year, but different than for EU citizens. Non-EU citizens have to actively provide documents on an ongoing basis in order for the TR to be renewed. And also there are limitations. The TR for non-Europeans can only be renewed a few times, whereas for EU citizens, there is free right of movement for every individual and assets in the EU. So EU member citizens can just relocate to any EU member country whenever they want, how long they want, live and work from there. That's why Cyprus offers the actual PR, which is the pink slip, or also called the gold visa, because very interesting. Now, in the next few months, Cyprus will actually enter Schengen. The president says it will be in 2026, meaning the golden visa will also give you visa-free travel access to over 30 other Schengen countries, which will definitely increase the demand for the golden visa, or currently PR. Also, there used to be the category F route, which was basically also a PR without an investment, but those are not processed anymore. And even back then, it used to take literally years until those category F PRs got approved. So the category F is not a thing anymore, and Cyprus solely focuses on the PR by investments, which is mainly one, the 300,000 euros investment into an off-plan property, basically a newly built property or a property under construction from a developer, and also the BFU route, where you have to send 200,000 euros from an offshore bank account that you or a company of yours own to a Cyprus company that we will then register for you as a company of foreign interest, and then also register it with the business facilitation unit, which basically gives you the right to stay in Cyprus and work from here for 36 months, and then we also have to renew it. So effectively, the main and most popular route is the 300,000 euros off-plan investment. With Tax.One, our partner company, we will assist you in that as well to find the perfect property and also handle all the paperwork for your permanent residency application. And now it's getting interesting, because Cyprus actually offers multiple paths to citizenship for EU nationals, but also for non-EU nationals. It basically is a citizenship by naturalization, where you have to spend a few years in the country Cyprus. It can range from 3 years under special criteria and goes up to 7 years. Those criteria can be learning Greek, having special degrees and education certificates from your home country, registering companies, doing certain business activities, being in business sectors, which we're also happy to discuss in an individual consultation call, because it's just, the video would be too long when we talk about that. But Dubai's immigration looks very interesting. They basically also have temporary residency schemes, which can be employment visas, investor visas, partner visas, and a few others. As I told you, I'm also in the UAE and I personally have a partner visa. It basically looks like that. This right here is the Emirates ID. It says my employer, my occupation, partner, and a few Arabic characters on it. And remember what I said earlier? I said that in order to become a tax resident, you first need to have a residency permit. And this right here is my residence permit. But this is not my tax residency. So just by owning this card right here, it doesn't mean that I pay 0% in my income, because I'm still a tax resident of Cyprus. I also have a yellow slip, but I also have the Emirates ID, meaning I can enter and leave the UAE and Cyprus whenever I want. I have permanent residencies in both countries and I can work from both countries. If I were to spend 90 days in the UAE, not more than 6 months in Cyprus, then I have 0% income tax in the UAE. I have companies in both countries and I'm doing kind of a hybrid model that I will definitely discuss in future videos. First, let's discuss the permanent residency, because again, this is not the permanent residency, the Emirates ID, it's just a temporary one. In order to get the permanent residency, which is 5 to 10 years, it's also called the golden visa in the UAE. For the 5-year golden visa, there are quite some routes on how you can obtain it. It is involved with investment, with business and all that. And for the 10-year golden visa, the main route is to invest 2 million dirhams into a real estate property in the UAE. But whether it is TR or PR in the UAE, you will almost never get the chance for citizenship unless you make substantial amount of contributions to the country, build a unicorn in that country or a huge business, do something local, invest money, give money to charities, those kinds of things. And even then, there is no specific procedure. You basically need to be elected. It is citizenship by merit, basically, where the royal family decides whether or not you get the citizenship. So now we are perfectly in line. We discussed the immigration, residency and citizenship options. We understand the personal taxation in both jurisdictions. And so it is time to discuss corporate taxation. Let's start with Cyprus. Currently, the trading or corporate tax in Cyprus is 12.5%. But as we can see here, there is a tax reform currently, and they want to increase the 12.5% to 15% to be in line with the global minimum corporate tax from the OECD. And that tax reform could be implemented early next year. So maybe the corporate tax will be 15%, but it is still under discussion, still for voting. So it is not 100% yet as the time of recording this video, but what's already in place is the beautiful IP box regime in Cyprus. And we have quite some clients that take advantage of the IP box regime, which basically means that qualifying IP income, so basically income from your intellectual property, is only taxed as low as 2.5%. It is not 2.5% per se, because remember I said for IP income, and in order to accurately tell you if you're eligible and qualified for the IP box regime, we need to understand your business. So again, definitely make sure to book an individual consultation call on Tax.One, and then we are more than happy to help you. But what you need to know is that somewhere in the range of 2.5% to 12.5% or 15% in the near future, somewhere there would be your corporate tax here in Cyprus, which is interesting because it could be even lower than in the UAE. Cyprus has one of the lowest corporate taxes in the EU, with the IP box regime the lowest. Cyprus offers EU banking access. Whether or not you like it, you will get it here with a lot of European banks like Revolut, Wise, many other neo banks, local banks in Cyprus that all accept your Cyprus limited company. Cyprus also has the Cyprus holding structure, which is super popular, especially at the moment. I think 3 out of 10 inquiries are currently about holding structures, just because it is such a tax efficient way of creating a holding structure where you can receive dividends from other entities in other jurisdictions at 0% tax here in Cyprus. And then from that holding company, you can just pay yourself a dividend. If you're a resident in Cyprus or Dubai, you pay 0% on your dividend income, or you just shift your capital into other companies. You make investments and you can then sell the shares of those trading companies at 0% capital gains tax, which is much more tax efficient than issuing invoices if you just have one trading company. Anyway, that's about the holding company. I will definitely make a separate video about the Cyprus holding structure in the near future, so definitely make sure to subscribe. I also want to mention the Cyprus International Trust, which basically bypasses any inheritance tax in the world. So if you open a Cyprus trust, you can put your assets in the trust, you can have your kids as the beneficiaries, and then after 2 years, the ownership to those assets are decoupled from you as an individual, which will help you with, for example, divorces, with legal actions against you, because you don't own the assets anymore. And then at some point in the future, your kids can then inherit your assets, income, capital, whatever it is, at 0% inheritance tax through the Cyprus trust. But also here, separate video. As you see, taxes are just so complex. I could talk about everything for hours and hours. And Cyprus has more than 60 double tax treaties with other countries, which definitely is a huge point if you're relocating to Cyprus. Now, corporate trading tax in the UAE, 9%. I still remember just a few years ago when they implemented the 9% corporate tax. A lot of people couldn't believe it, didn't believe it. They were like, no chance, it will stay 0%. But no, just a super tiny fraction of income and businesses are exempt from the trading tax in the UAE. Most services, most goods and products that you sell are liable for 9% corporate tax, but they have a tax-free allowance. There is 0% on the first 370k AED that you earn within a tax calendar year, which is a few 10,000 euros. Then the UAE has many free zones. I personally have a free zone company in IFSA, but there are many other free zones, which is different to mainland companies like Dubai, for example. So Dubai is mainland and then free zone is IFSA and many others. But it is again super complicated. The main thing I want to say is that you can still apply for the small business relief, which is just next year. And that is 0% on the first 3 million dirhams. So that is about 700,000 euros, something like that. So that is quite a sum, but you need to be aware that you cannot earn more than 3 million dirhams. So this right here is basically just for companies that earn a maximum of 3 million. And then as soon as you earn 3,000,001 dirhams, you are not a small business anymore. And then you would need to pay 9% on all the income. That is why the goal for next year is to stay under 700,000 euros or whatever the converted amount of 3 million is. Stay under that and you can basically be corporate tax free in 2026 in the UAE. But I have a little screenshot here from the OECD that I mentioned earlier. Coming from the US, there is a global minimum corporate tax of 15% that they want to implement in all countries over the world. They started with huge corporations that need to pay this 15% tax, and slowly but surely they are bringing this to small and medium-sized businesses even. So such business reliefs will be less and less in the future. The UAE and Dubai was completely tax-free for a long time, and so the 9% corporate tax that was introduced in 2023 came with a big surprise for everyone, especially because it was implemented so quickly. And this is due to UAE's political framework, which allows them to make changes very promptly. Compared to the EU, the royal family can basically decide on new rules, laws, taxes and more without any approval from voters or parliaments. I have to add that the royal family is so far doing a great job in listening to their citizens and residents and not abusing their power, but you have to understand that if the sheikhs decide for something, they can implement it the next day. It is simply not a democracy as in Europe or Cyprus, where it takes months or years for small changes to be proposed, then discussed, maybe changed, probably changed, and then voted and eventually implemented after hundreds of people tried to give their own opinion and ideas to it. Also, even though Cyprus and the UAE both have quite some double tax treaties with various different countries, they are not the same. And so it's very important to look at your individual case, which double tax treaty applies to you. And this depends on where you're coming from, where your business is located, and how your current structure looks like. For the UAE specifically, there are two cases that I found out that are relevant for many viewers. And that is one, there is no double tax treaty with the USA, which leads to the fact that any US sourced income will most likely be applicable to a 30% withholding tax. For me, for example, this affects my AdSense income that I generate through my YouTube channels. If I were to earn my YouTube AdSense income under my UAE company, then Google withholds about 30%. But because I'm generating my AdSense income in Cyprus under my Cyprus Limited company, Cyprus has a DTT with the US, there's 0% withholding tax if the paperwork is done correctly. Another example which is also relevant to me is the double tax treaty between the UAE and Germany, which actually expired in 2022. And so as a German citizen residing in the UAE and doing business there, we technically have no legal protection from double taxation. And so at any time, Germany could just make some small changes in their law which requires German citizens to pay taxes in Germany as well, even though they are residents in the UAE. And now, even though it's a bit far-fetched, worst case scenario here would be if Germany also introduces a law that allows them to back tax us. And so imagine at some point in the future, Germany says, we have enough of all the Germans leaving Germany, we don't accept it anymore. And so they will investigate all their citizens living abroad and require past tax declarations since 2022, and if they see that you didn't pay taxes in Germany, they will say you have to pay it now. And I personally am a bit worried about that because I know how strict German tax authorities are, but I don't want to sound too dystopian. I just wanted to make you aware about that. And now let's continue with the video. And that's about the corporate tax. I think it was quite clear to understand the differences. So Cyprus 15% flat, whether you make €1 or not. UAE, lower corporate tax, 9%, even some tax-free allowances. Still the option to pay 0% next year, which I will definitely take advantage of with my UAE company. And VAT is relevant in both countries actually, even though it is optional for both countries. So basically in Cyprus, you only need to register for VAT if you have a local business, if you trade locally or within the European Union, which is most likely the case if you open up a Cyprus company, unless you have a holding company. But even in that case, sometimes you need to register for VAT. And then there's also the EU OSS, which is the one-stop shop for e-commerce, very relevant. If you basically ship your products to many European countries, there is a threshold of €10,000 for distance selling, where you then have to register for one more thing, but this is something that your accountant is taking care of. I just want to mention it so you know what's coming if you incorporate in Cyprus. The standard VAT rate is 19%, which you need to add to all your invoices that you sell to customers, but there are quite some reduced VAT rates. I made a separate video talking about my 2 tax hacks if you have a Cyprus company on how you can save money, and this is one of the things that I mentioned there, so you can watch that video if you want. And the reduced VAT rates is alongside tax write-offs one of the things that I'm talking about there. You will find the videos on my channel. Then we have 0% VAT for non-EU customers and businesses, as well as non-European Economic Area customers, which is interestingly enough also Norway, Liechtenstein and Switzerland. A lot of people are not aware about that. And even if you issue an invoice, for example, to your customers to Switzerland with VAT, and you pay that VAT to the government. So basically it's a value added tax. It's not affecting your business, but still you're charging the customer, especially relevant for mass products where you want to be as cheap as possible, so you're not losing on the competition. There it is very interesting to know you can charge 0%, which makes a difference if your average order value is rather small. Then reverse charge, also interesting for cross-border transactions within the European Union. All invoices that you send out to other European countries that is not Cyprus, you can charge 0% on that. But you need their VAT number of their business that needs to be active. You need to actively check it in the internet, basically enter it and see whether or not the VAT number is active. And then the VAT is reversed to the customer. So you are not collecting it and paying it to the Cyprus tax authorities, but they have the obligation to pay their tax authorities wherever your client is located. Then also Dubai has VAT registration as optional. And in the UAE, most likely you don't have to register for VAT unless you do local trading. So you sell marketing services to a local cafe in Dubai or anything local, you provide services locally, but even then, you have a tax-free threshold of 375k as well when you need to register the VAT. And even then, the standard rate in the UAE is just 5%, which is much lower than the 19% in Cyprus. But again, it is a value-added tax. So you are just collecting it from the end consumer and you're paying and transferring it as a middleman to the government. Now, we understand quite some things about the personal tax, corporate tax in both jurisdictions, and we most likely have the question now, okay, Ricardo, but how much does it cost if I decide to relocate, incorporate a company, apply for the Emirates ID, the yellow slip, the non-dom certificate? How much does all of that cost? It sounds good, but I want to know prices. So let's discuss exactly that. And the first thing that I just quickly want to mention, because it is very relevant actually, is the living costs. And Cyprus definitely has affordable living costs. My fixed costs per month are about 3,000 to 4,000 euros. And I'm having a beautiful penthouse apartment in city center of Paphos. I'm going out for coffee every day, and I'm going occasionally for restaurants, drinks and all that, maybe twice a week. And I have 2 cars, I have a motorbike, I have another person that I pay for everything. So those are my fixed costs here. Whereas in Dubai, it is one of the most expensive cities in the world. And my fixed costs there are, if I spend a month there, maybe 5, 6, up to 7,000 euros, which is most likely because I use Airbnb, which is much more expensive than a 1-year rental contract. But this is something that you definitely need to know. Now, corporate services. And both countries are actually cheap, let's say it like that. Especially the relocation packages are much cheaper than most people say. Whenever we send out our offers, people are surprised. Wow, I didn't think it's that cheap. And that is because we send out full packages. Our philosophy at Tax.One is to send you one price and you don't need to pay for anything else for the next 12 months. Whereas other service providers, lawyers, accountants, they basically send you ongoing invoices, which in my eyes are hidden costs, which I don't really appreciate, because when I came to Cyprus, I didn't understand what UBO registration is, what VAT, social insurance, payroll services, and all that are things that the service providers need to do, and then they just issue an invoice for that, and you just look at the invoice and you're like, wow, 500 euros for what? What even is that? That's why we send out full relocation packages or full packages for a holding structure. You pay us once and that's it. Same goes for accounting. We charge about 2 to 3K annually, depending on the volume and transactions of your business. If you issue only one invoice to one employer every month, it's obviously cheaper than if you're running an e-commerce store with thousands of transactions every month. The audit is super cheap here in Cyprus, 1 to 2,000 euros, depending on the volume and transactions of your company. And slight adjustments like changing the name of your company, changing the shareholders, the directors and secretaries and all that, those are super cheap services where we charge 100 euros. Because this is not our business. We want to build long-term relationships with our client and maybe even talk about investment opportunities, real estate opportunities with our partner company of Plan.One. This is what we are interested in. We are not interested in hidden costs and basically damaging our reputation because we are not transparent from the beginning. The same applies to UAE. That is exactly how we operate there as well. There are medium-priced setup costs with the flights, with the medical checks that you need to do and fingerprints and biometrics and all that. You will probably end up at around 10,000 euros. This is very high. So if you spend a good week there and you go out and all that, but the actual corporate services will be more in the range of 5,000 euros. But again, you will have other expenses that we are happy to advise you in an individual consultation call. Our corporate legal costs will be around 5,000 euros. Accounting will be around 2 to 3,000 euros annually. And the audit, same price as in Cyprus, 1 to 2K, depending on your business activities and size of the business. And adjustments and additional costs are expensive. I have to say it as it is, just because the out-of-pocket expenses, the real expenses we have in the UAE are also quite high. So the government in the UAE is just more expensive than the government here in Cyprus. And that is the reason why UAE is more expensive, but it makes sense. It's a different clientele. I have to say it as it is. Different people are interested in Cyprus than the people that are interested in the UAE. I personally spent my time in both countries. That is also why we advise in both jurisdictions with Tax.One. And if you are interested in either of those two jurisdictions, we are more than happy to talk to you in an individual consultation call. Reach out to us on Tax.One, fill out the form, and you will hear back from us very soon.